Hello, my name is Evan Perkins, and today I'm speaking with Robert Knight about his current exhibition at Gallery Caiaphas titled 13 Ways. 13 Ways is comprised of 32 color photographs of his daughter Eden, beginning with her birth in 2006 and continuing through the present. The images in 13 Ways are personal and intimate, revealing the relationship between a father and his daughter and their bond that grows and changes as Eden becomes an adult. Robert Knight writes, inspired by Wallace Stevens' poem, 13 Ways is a collection of photographs of my daughter since she was born in 2006. The project is at once both a reflection of a father's nearly blind obsession with his child and a representation of the multiplicity of personalities that a young woman coming of age can choose to embody. Knight received an MFA in photography from the Massachusetts College of Art and Design and a BA in architecture and economics from Yale University. His work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and is in the collections of the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Lightworks Syracuse, Center for Photography Woodstock, and numerous private collections. He's currently an associate professor of art at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York. Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Evan. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
For over a decade, your artistic practice has focused on the exploration of the familial, often through the lens of fatherhood. How did your desire to photograph in this manner initially come about, and how has it shaped your work leading to the images you've made of your daughter, Eden?
Photography came to me, it really was inspired to me through my father. My father had a darkroom in our house when I was growing up and was the first person who gave me a camera when I was in college. As an architecture major, I started using photography to document my work and to explore the urban environment as an undergraduate. And that led to a longer term sort of fascination with photography that led me to continuing taking undergraduate classes and eventually coming back to the Mass College of Art as a graduate student. And the work that I applied to graduate school with was a project focused on my son, who was born in 2003, and it was called the Harry Project. And that work really was about the transition from being kind of an independent adult to a responsible parent, and kind of the challenges of that shift from a personal perspective. And the work was really a reflection of those challenges. And so when my daughter was born in 2006, it felt like a natural thing to kind of continue that process of documentation, the process of kind of the relationship and the connection between a parent and a child. And so I wanted to think about both, my response to that, both from a standpoint of kind of love and affection, but also kind of the experience of what the child is going through and how they are changing both physically and emotionally, and the kind of the person that they are on the path to becoming. And so the pictures that we made together, and I really, I see them very much as a collaboration, as collaborative portraits, as all portraiture really is. For example, with this picture, the Secret Pond photograph, was a place that we spent time in the summers out on Cape Cod, and it was a place where we would go swimming in the afternoons. And one day I said, can we make a photograph there? And Eden said, sure, let's make a photograph. And so I brought the 4x5 camera and we set up a couple of different shots. And this was one that, again, was a joint sort of decision. It was one that evolved after spending some time together in that space. And this idea of kind of a place that we shared together, sort of a private place. There's no other people in the photograph. You can sort of see the pond in the background to the right, sort of through the trees. But there's a sense of kind of the magic, I think, of a special place that a father and a child, a daughter in this case, might be sharing together.
I'm interested to hear about how you became initially interested in portraiture. It seems like in the beginning of your artistic practice, photography was a way to document your previous architecture work, which is a completely different medium in regards to your own practice. And it seems to have shifted over into photography. Was there an interest in portraiture that was an early influence as well? You mentioned learning photography from your father and having that relationship. So I wonder if that translated through the generations leading from you and your father and now you interacting with your children as well.
I think portraiture is a really challenging photographic genre. I think, architecture in a way was easier for me initially. It was a more formal practice. It was something that, you're doing on a tripod. You don't have a moving subject. When I talk to my students now, I always encourage them to start off with things that are easier to photograph. And for me, architecture was that thing that was easier for me to photograph. My background in architecture, I think, also facilitated that. And I was interested in the signification of objects, the signification of spaces and the meanings that we can kind of associate with those things. But ultimately, I also, as a photographer, really wanted to be a good portrait photographer. And so my kids as subjects were a natural place to start because I had access to them, and they were very pliable models in terms of willingness to participate and willingness to be patient, in most cases at least. And there's a little less pressure than, having set up a portrait shoot with someone you don't know that well, or even a friend, and trying to learn how to do portraiture through them. So I think that was a natural thing. And in my larger practice, I now do a lot of portraiture of strangers and people I don't know as well. And so I think that working with my kids was a way to kind of get better at it, honestly. But also I was as a graduate student, I started looking at a lot of artists who used portraiture in their practice and photographed their families. So, in thinking about this conversation with you today, I was thinking specifically about a really important book to me at the time, which I pulled off my shelf today, which was Pleasures and Terrors of Domestic Comfort, which was a Peter Galassi show at MoMA in the 1980s. And it really was a showcase of contemporary artists, mostly working in color photography, who photographed their family or photographed domestic scenes of domesticity. People like Sally Mann, people like Doug Dubois, people like Philip Lorca de Corsia. And so there was kind of a sense of an imprimatur of acceptability of the domestic and of the personal and of the family as subject matter. So those were things that were all kind of circling around in my mind as I was working on these projects and trying to figure out how to make them into something beyond the personal, something that is also universal and artistic.
It seems that you draw influences from mediums outside of photography to inform your own practice as well. You mentioned that the title of this work is inspired by the Wallace Stevens poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. What drew you to this poem, and how do you see it relating to the images that you've made? Is there a certain line or stanza that you resonate with the most, and how does poetry make itself apparent in your practice as well?
One of the things I think about with that, and one of the reasons that poem, I think, was influential and important in this project is the limitations of photography in a way, which are, that you're only looking at a particular moment in time, and you're looking at ultimately a constructed moment, right? A moment that the photographer and, in this case, the subject have collaborated together to create for the audience. Ultimately, it's a kind of a fiction, right? It's a kind of a construction. And I think about the pictures in this project really are a multitude of perspectives on my daughter's identity, right? On the shaping of that identity, the changing of that identity over time. The Wallace Stevens poem is exactly about that. It's about the ways that, in this case, a blackbird can exist to us as people walking through a park or sitting on a bench or listening from your window. It's about that sort of metaphor of multiplicity. The stanza, for me at least, that I think is the most influential is the fifth one. It's the one that goes, I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just after. And it's something I talk about a lot with my students is when we make a photograph, we bring our own perspective to that subject matter, and no two artists are going to make the same picture of the same subject. And that's what I think about when I think about the Stevens poem, and I think about the pictures that my daughter and I have made together, is that they are different each time because she's changing and I'm changing over the course of the project. And so they are really a multitude of perspectives. They are this sort of diversity of identity across time. Poems are built on words, and they're based on the right words in the right order. And photographs are the same way, right? They're built on objects that are signifiers and that create meaning for us. And so the parallel, I think, between poetry and photography is exactly that. It's about these sort of signification of very specific things. And I think when you're creating a portrait, you're really thinking about the things that are in the picture that create meaning for the audience. And in a lot of cases, it's about narrowing that scope down to a relatively limited vocabulary so that your audience can take away the content that you're hoping for them to take away. And so it's about a clarification or clarity of meaning. And I think the poetry is very much the same way, right? It's a very limited number of words, in a stanza or a line, and each word really matters. And I think that's the case with photography as well.
Speaking of that, the type of clarity that you're expanding on, I think one of the compelling aspects of the work is how it's simultaneously specific and universal. Not only are you documenting Eden's early stages of life, you're also examining your relationship with her through the context of your own growth as a father, but also as an individual. It acts as both a window and a mirror. And I'm interested to hear about what you've learned maybe about yourself and Eden through this photographing, as well as how it shaped your ideas of parenthood, the passage of time, and the inevitability of growing older.
these pictures serve as a kind of recorder of moments in time and a sort of creation of memory in a way. It's something that I think, again, I talk a lot about with my students, is the role of photography in the creation of memories in our lives. I think a lot of us, as we get older, we forget things. We forget the difficult times in our lives. We forget, we sort of almost unconsciously forget things. And I think photography can serve as a way to remind us, both positively and negatively, of moments in time. It can remind us of the challenges that we've gone through. It can remind us of the celebrations that we've had. And I think a lot of times, the traditional photographs of the family album are exactly that. They're the sort of more celebratory moments, the birthdays, the Christmases, the holidays. And it reminds me of another photographer that I think has been important influence for me over time, which was Larry Sultan and his project Pictures from Home. And he talks exactly about that sort of contrast, the pictures that were from the family album versus the pictures that he was making. And I think about my pictures in that way as well, because they're about that complexity of life. It's not always an easy moment. It's sometimes a more complicated moment. It's about the changing of a young woman as she's going from being a child into a young adult. It was about sort of burgeoning sexuality. It's about the different potential roles that she can embody. And so I think for me as a father, it's important to be doing this project because I want to remember those moments, the challenges and the celebrations as well. And so for me, it's a really important thing to be doing. And I think for a lot of photographers, that's a similar motivation for them to be making this type of work, is that it kind of serves as a reminder of the complexity of our domestic lives. It is a collaboration. And I think I'm very grateful that she has been a willing participant for much of this time. And I hope that we can continue making, pictures together, and that she sees something beneficial out of it too. She's been very supportive and interested in participating over the years, but it's one of those things that you never know when suddenly the collaborator will decide not to want to collaborate anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a fear in my mind. To lose a muse, to lose a subject would be tragic in a way.
I wonder how she acts as not only a collaborator, but a contributor to the work. How does she interact with you in this work? Does she have ideas for pictures herself? What kind of agency does she use to include herself in the images as well?
Yeah, more so now than when she was younger, for sure. Mm-hmm. Like now there'll be times when she says, let's go make a photograph. Let's go do that together. And she'll have some idea for a pose or something that she would like to kind of capture in the image. And mm-hmm. She definitely wants to review the images afterwards. And I actually gave her complete authority or veto rights, essentially, in this project to not show any pictures that she didn't want shown. And there were a few that I was planning to include that she said, no, I don't like that picture. You can't include it. And I think, again, that's about that collaboration and how important it is to have a respectful relationship with your subjects so that you can continue making pictures of them. Because if you're not respectful of their wishes and feelings about the photographs, then they're going to close down and not be willing to participate with you. So yeah, she definitely has taken more kind of agency as time has evolved. And I think she has a much more sophisticated sense of what makes a good picture now than she obviously did when she was younger. She's, thinking about light and shadow and things like that, and seeing that actually as we're setting up shots. And so that's been really interesting to see. And I'm always curious, of course, as a parent, sort of how that will influence the choices she makes in terms of her own life, in terms of what she does. She's had some interest in thinking about being an artist, being a painter, that's kind of one of the things she's talked about. And so I think as a parent, it's always interesting to think about the things that we transfer to our kids, even unconsciously. I certainly would never put any pressure on her to be an artist, but these things are passed down, again, unconsciously through the things that you share with each other, right? And this has been something we've shared together for almost 15 years now. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes who she becomes as an adult.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I encourage everybody to come see the work in person. It's great to be able to speak with you here, but the way that the images translate to the wall with your thoughtful way of installing it as well just reinforces all the ideas that we've spoken of today. So I appreciate you being able to be willing to donate your time to speaking about this, and hopefully people are able to see the work in person for themselves.
Thanks so much, Evan. I really enjoyed chatting with you. It was great to talk about it.